Unhealthy friends are people who will try to get things out of you, but not give in return.
You're giving so much, and they're just taking and taking and taking, and you feel like you have to do certain things to impress them. Like, I've had this for sure, and it's like, you just like, you'll hang out with them and you're just like drained after, because it's like, I feel like I'm just like giving so much of myself, and I'm being this person that just like isn't me.
What do you want out of that relationship, and what do you want to get from it? Are you just in the relationship to be in a relationship? Are you there to make a long-time friend or partner? Are you there for the fun of it? Like, there are certain things that you would want to put into that relationship and certain things that you don't.
If I show my grandma this picture on my camera roll and I hand you the phone to look at it, that does not mean go scrolling through my other photos. Because and if I try to take my phone back, that doesn't mean I'm hiding something. That means I just don't want you going through all my photos.
Poking and prodding isn't going to get the answer that they want, because my parents sometimes like poke and prod, and I'm like, no, that's not what I want. Like, if there's a problem and there's like a healthy parent-child relationship, like we will come to our parents and we'll say, this is what I'm dealing with, like, I need help, or like, can you give me advice? But if parents like pry too much, I feel like that makes us feel like we need to keep it closed because we can't come to them to talk and stuff like that.
I have a couple of friends who are in on and off relationships, and a lot of the times it is toxic relationships, and I'm just like, you can't be doing that. That's not good for you, that's not good for them, and that's not good for the people around you.
Like, communication is key. When people say that, they're not lying. Like, communication is key. Communication, trust, loyalty, stuff like that, that's gonna make it in the long run. And some people think that one small argument is being toxic. That's just relationships.
I want to start with you, Kaylee. The students we chatted with, and when you just talk with kids, they want trust, they want connection, and they want privacy in their relationships. Any of that concern you?
I think part of it can be concerning if you're not able to tap in, if you're not able to build rapport and understand why they need that trust. I think everybody needs trust. I think everyone needs a sense of privacy to feel secure and safe in their life. And so I think that that's valid and isn't concerning to an extent, because who doesn't want to feel safe in their self and safe in their secrets? You don't want everyone to know your deepest things. But I really like that the youth talked about trust, connection, and rapport with their parents. That's the biggest thing. Your parents are going to know the warning signs before anyone else does when it comes to mental health, substance abuse, trauma, all of the topics we've talked about today. So if you have that rapport and that relationship with your mom or dad or that figure, they're going to see those signs and be able to ask you about it. It starts with validation. So saying to you, hey, I noticed that today was a rougher day. Do you want to talk to someone about it? Not assuming they want to talk to you, not putting yourself in the position to assume you're the safe person, but giving them an option. Like, hey, I noticed that you're not doing well. Can I get you someone to talk to? Because you need it.
And then Kevin, good and bad relationships. It plays out in how a kid behaves. What are you seeing in schools?
Yeah, so teaching, healthy relationships and having adults model that, and also what a good friend is and what your role is in reciprocal, for that. And so, to add, I'll start with, the negative side of that. We've seen things like human trafficking, increase. These are relationships that kids have that can be dependent relationships. And if adults aren't having clear lines of communication or even aware of this type of phenomena, that if your child is going to spend the night with someone that you may not know, or they say they're going someplace and you don't verify that. All the things that we used to do, at least growing up, is like call the parent to talk to them before your child goes over there. Those are all things that we should still be doing. Meet the other family before your child goes over there. Those are all healthy things. And then on the positive side of that is looking at where are those healthy relationships that they describe. If it's the constant roller coaster or dependent relationships, whether it's like in a child or a student is dating someone, or whether it's with a friendship, it's helping them identify those key values. How do you want to be treated by other people? Well, guess what? Other people want those same things. And so that's the person that you have to be to others if you want that in reciprocal, because oftentimes what you put out is what you get back from friendships. And in the behaviors that you put out there may isolate you, because there are folks who aren't looking for those type of things. So how can we teach that? But I also want to be cautious that we're and I appreciate that you said earlier that these kids aren't empty vessels. They have strengths. They are resilient. Like all of us, they have flaws, but that isn't a sentence of who they are. They're malleable, and the brain isn't fully developed until we're in our 20s. So again, as our community, let's take ownership of raising our children.
So Chris, in the courtrooms, are you doing that? Are you talking to students and young people about the relationships they have and how that impacts their behavior?
I think that's one of the biggest things is so many times you hear from parents when a child gets involved in the criminal justice system as a juvenile is they were a good kid until they got in the wrong crowd. And that is something we try and talk about, and especially I think the probation officers really emphasize is in terms of, okay, you've made a mistake, how can you affect that? And part of that is, who are you going to hang out with? What are you going to do to change that? But that's very hard. I mean, that's a hard thing to do because usually they may have been involved in that family or that neighborhood or whatever where these people are for a long time, and trying to break those cycles, just think as adults, breaking a cycle of friendship or somebody you kind of get in your habit of seeing all the time, it's difficult. It's easier said than done.
So Carrie, how do we create healthy boundaries?
Yeah, I think we model them as adults. So I know a lot of times when parents get into a fight, they will make up later, after the kids go to bed, oh, we'll talk about this later. But I think one of the biggest things that you can do for your kids is to model how to make up after an argument or model how to resolve that conflict. I saw a study where kids were going to school after they witnessed a parent argument, and the stress proteins in the student the next day were higher. Except for when they got to see the resolution, because kids don't know that you made up later. And so I think modeling those healthy boundaries is one of the most important things that you can do for students.
Really good advice, because we don't see the beginning, the middle, and the end, and that's important.
Kids usually see the beginning and the middle, but they hardly ever get to see the resolution.
So Dr. Lowery, I know you could talk about relationships all day, because it's such an important part of childhood development. What advice would you give us in the room when it comes to our kids in relationships, whether it's family, whether it's interpersonal, with our peers?
Well, like my panelist said, it's ongoing, and modeling it, knowing where your child is, all those things. A lot of times one of the things parents say, well, they don't talk to me. And I always tell the parent, I said, I get it, but did you tell your mama everything that you were doing? And then I said, give them their space. But also, it's not a one and done conversation. You say, hey, I'm here. If you need me, let's talk about it. And it might be 1 o'clock in the morning. I had one mom said, yeah, I opened the space. And you know what? She texted me at 1 o'clock in the morning and said, Mom, can we talk? And she said, I said yes, and she came in the room and we had a conversation. But just opening that space and having that ongoing conversation and showing that you care, and realize. And the other thing I tell parents and those, you don't have to go and, well, when I was your age and tell your War and Peace story. You don't have to do that. That's not what you have to do. But say, I made some mistakes, but these are some things that work for me, and modeling that resiliency, and realize that one of the joys of my job is that I get to see them go through teenagerdom and come out on the other side, and they're overall, yes, we can all tell, we were earlier chatting, and we can all tell these, I don't want to say horrible stories, but these challenging stories, but I think for every challenging story, we can probably tell 80 stories of resiliency and how that teenager and that family turned out. And so but being a community and that's what I think we have to do for our families and for ourselves. And the other thing is give ourselves grace in this trying time. And the other thing we have to do is take care of yourself as a parent, as a mentor, and because our teenagers, they're looking at how you're handling that situation. And so all those things we need to do to just have better spaces and better lives.
Kevin, I think about school, and I think relationships play a big piece in conflict. And how do you deal with that? And how can we learn from what you're doing and maybe implement it in our organizations?
So one of the focuses that we've had is, restorative practices. And so we've done it with families, we've done it with students. And so, for instance, we had a situation where 2 kindergartners were having conflict, and then the parents got involved because, they're looking after their kids. And we said, how about we just have a conversation and to better understand. And then once the families started talking to each other about why is this child hands-on and what's going on, it's really not personal toward the child. It's that child expressing his needs were unmet, and so getting attention was what he was seeking because of different life factors. And so for those parents and those children to sit with a counselor, a principal, and have that type of conversation, those are skills that if we can teach at a young age, that they'll build throughout their adulthood. And I'll give another example. In sports, there was some discussion about ending the handshake line after a game because we can't handle congratulating someone after we've lost. Failure has to be a part of who we are and how we teach how to respond to that. And we can compete hard or we can do our best, and sometimes it's not enough. That doesn't mean that we didn't get better. It's how do we bounce back from that, and how can we make sure that kids know that that's just part of our life lessons of growing and learning, and making sure that those are reinforced as positive attributes, not as negatives. And I think, again, it's just our values and our actions. Are they in alignment?
And we're doing the same thing in the criminal justice system. We're picking up restorative. We started a restorative justice program for juveniles for the same reasons, in terms of, incarceration is not always the answer in terms of educating and trying to get people beyond whatever brought them that conflict. And so we've had some success in terms of, getting victims and, defendants together and using the West Michigan Dispute Resolution Center and trying to solve those problems to maybe create, long-term, how do we keep this person out of the criminal justice system going forward, and changing those behaviors at that point in time with restorative justice has been very important.
And I will say schools are critical to keeping people out of the criminal justice system. If we can do a great job at schools, we know we can cut off that school to prison pipeline.
What are you seeing that works? Anybody? When it comes to students in conflict, you're talking about a particular program. Some of us may not be aware of that. What's working in that program?
Well, I think just the restorative justice, the whole idea is trying to get both sides to understand. I think there is greater understanding when, a lot of times victims are, why did this happen to me? And so they get a chance to talk and ask those questions to the offender, and they get a greater understanding of maybe the life circumstances, where that offender's coming from as well, it gives a greater voice to the victim in terms of they come up with an agreement, which is really unheard of in the criminal justice system, because usually it's the judge imposing, saying, thou shalt do this, where maybe the victim wants something different. So I think it's very empowering for both sides to provide that education and knowledge and maybe change behaviors when you have much more of a personal stake and a personal impact when you have that kind of contact between the two parties.
I think proactive measures are key, making sure that we're remaining aware of the warning signs before it actually happens. As I stated earlier, parents and guardians, they know best. And so when you're seeing someone getting amped up and when you can jump in before it hits moment of crisis. I think the other piece of proactive measures is having that community support networks, having those access to the programs that our gentlemen are talking about, having access to more community activities so that they can see more healthy relationships role modeled. A parent's relationship is the first relationship that a youth knows, but then there's way more out there. And so being able to give them more access to learn the different types of relationships you can hold, professional in the community, not just a relationship and as a parent.
So our final question, and I ask this as a final question to our students as well. I asked the students what advice would they give parents, and things they said were, go easy on us, it's tough, we're doing our best, expectations are too high, or let's just talk. I want your best advice, each of you, for all of us in the room today. We're here because we want change, we want to help, we want to be a part of a solution. So let's just work our way down. We'll start at the far end, and then each of you just offer your best insights for us because of your expertise, what you would have for us today.
Absolutely. My best piece of advice for everyone in the audience is that when trauma and mental health, substance abuse, any of these aspects are on the table, the only way out is through. Talk about it. Stop avoiding the situation. It's uncomfortable. It's not a phase. This is real life stuff. Get down and get dirty, be willing to roll your sleeves up and be able to have those uncomfortable conversations, because that's where growth is happening. We don't grow in our comfort zone, we grow in our uncomfortable zone.
I think for me, prevention saves lives. And the biggest piece of prevention, just as a takeaway, is education. Tell kids the truth, don't lie to them, because they will see through you, and then you're not a trusted person for them anymore. And I always like to say that if you don't tell them, the world will, and the world won't be kind. And so it's important that they hear it from you, and be open to conversations with your kid. I'm a parent, and your knee jerk is always to be like, why did you do that? What were you thinking? How could you? But I think having a conversation in love and saying, like, letting your kid know that I love you and nothing that you do will change that. So what's going on, and let's make steps to help you. And if you don't know how to have that conversation, reach out for help for yourself first.
Yeah, I agree. I think for us is really developing a sense of community. I think of developing a sense of community within your home, for your child. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to explore things around mental illness. Another thing is, I think what people forget is your physician, your provider, your medical home is more than willing to partner with your the school and vice versa. And so there are ways that we can work together, whether it's 504 plans, counseling plans, developing individual educationalized plans. So those are the things I think sometimes we miss. I think sometimes, unfortunately, programming can be very siloed. But again, the other thing is, if, as a healthcare professional, if you don't tell us, we don't know. And so a lot of people think, well, if I just come to the doctor, all they're going to do is give me medication, and that's not necessarily true. But we're willing to work with you. We want to be supportive. We want to work with the community here. And so that's, I think, one of the greatest pieces of advice that I could give right now.
You kind of took mine, dang it. Yeah, ask for help. We got to put this. But no, in terms of asking for help, I think that's one of the biggest things, because there's so many different things with parents we're facing right now, and there's no way you can be an expert on all of them. And I touch on a lot of these things, but if I wasn't in this position, I think I'd be lost. So, and that's the blessing of living in Kent County is we have so many, we're resource rich in terms of there are so many organizations, whether it be Wedgwood, Pine Rest, Network 180, your local schools, or your community, your doctor. I mean, there are so many areas you can reach out if you have an issue, because you can't be experts as a parent or as an adult on everything. So don't be afraid to reach out and get help from somebody who can give you guidance in a specific area that you may be having an issue with.
So I think we have to start with the notion that our children are inherently brilliant, and that our schools and the way that our system is designed doesn't always bring that out. It wasn't designed for that. We have this antiquated system, and when we think about what are the skills necessary for our children to thrive, they're not the things that we valued when we were kids, because information is readily accessible anytime, anywhere, and it changes so fast. So we have to shift, I think, of what we value, things like critical thinking, things like communication, collaboration, creativity. And I think we'll see more joyful learning from our kids. I think we'll see less of the risk behaviors that we've described, because more college, more this, more isn't helping our kids. We're doing this to ourselves, and we don't have to. And we have to shift that conversation about what is the role of our schools and how are we going to thrive as a democracy, and that's predicated on our education system. And too often we pit communities against each other with who's rated higher for schools or who's rated better for where to live, instead of the notion that it's not a zero-sum game, that we can all win when everyone in the community wins. And we have to separate ourselves from that notion of I have to protect my child instead of we have to protect all of our children. And so I hope that conversation can continue in our community. And I also want to give a shout out to Miranda. Great job navigating as a moderator.
Thank you. I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm sure you are as well, aren't we blessed to have these kind of people in our community fighting for our kids every day in every area? I want to thank each of you. Thank you. And before we move to questions and answers, I want to give a shout out to the students who came into our station and spent 3 hours with us for interviews. We have a table full of them over in this area, and I want to say thank you, kids, for enlightening us. Thank you. Let's stand up if you would. I mean, they want to see you, so stand up. Show them who you are. Thank you. Great work.